Hello and welcome everybody. Good morning. Welcome to this new Railtech Masterclass. We have the pleasure of having Alex Kirk with us this morning from GB Railfreight. Before we dive in, let me tell you, yes, there's going to be a replay. So this is one of the common questions that pop up. There's going to be a replay. Yes, you can ask questions. So there you have the question tab at the bottom right. You can ask questions and you should ask questions because this is a very nice opportunity to have a live Q&A with Alex. And yes, we're going to talk about locomotives at one point of the presentation. So that's also one of the highlights you can look forward to. I'm Natalie, nice to meet you. And with me is Alex, and he's going to introduce himself and GB Railfreight in just a couple of seconds. There are a couple of functions here in this tool that we're using today. There is a chat function. You can say hi, and you can say where you connect from, maybe what you're looking for today, or whatever you feel like sharing with us this morning. There are going to be a couple of polls during the webinar, which you also can answer to. You can ask questions, and one very interesting thing is that you can actually upvote questions. If we have loads of questions, then you can upvote the ones that you find most interesting, and we will get back to those in priority. And just a few words about Everysense. So we're independent, we're French, but we're working all over Europe. And we integrate with every shipper, every railway undertaking, freight forwarder, wagon lessors, you name it. We organize those Railtech Masterclasses once a month to give a voice to all those stakeholders and to share challenges, best practices, perspectives for the sector, and for making rail freight the preferred mode of transport for industrial shippers in terms of efficiency, safety, and sustainability. Yes, and Alex, you may introduce yourself. And just before you do that, sorry, I'm really looking forward. I've been really looking forward to this Railtech Masterclass because it's the first one with a railway undertaker, and we have a very excellent co-host today in the person of Alex. So very happy to have you here, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. If we just pop. There are some slides that I'm going to talk through up. I'm going to start by saying, and I've looked at the list of those that are on, and there's a decent number of railway people on. I've intentionally done this presentation assuming no knowledge on rail freight whatsoever. So apologies for some, this will seem almost a bit too basic, but one of the things I'm quite keen that we do whenever we're talking about rail freight is not to assume that everybody works in the railway and actually pitch ourselves as a logistics solution, not a railway company. So that's just a sort of heads up before we start. In terms of what I am going to try and do a brief overview of is talk through some of the technology that's in use today, talk through some of the technology that is being rolled out and used in the future. So try and give a feel for how that's specific to different industries that use rail freight. And some of this will apply for all logistics solutions, whether it's shipping or road. And then the final bit of this will very much focus on costs, reducing CO2 and efficiencies that we can achieve through those. But before I start any of that, just to give an overview of GB Railfreight and myself, I'm the head of infrastructure rail services and HS2 at GB Railfreight. We were founded in 1999, headquartered in London, and we are one of the fastest growing companies in the railway sector. That's 20 years from 0 employees to today. So many of you will have heard of, or some of you will know, John Smith, who's our CEO, founded the business in 99. And we've obviously had a long journey to where we are today. And this slide here gives a rough overview of where we are. I'm not going to talk through it all, but headlines are over 1,400 people. One of the largest rail freight companies in the UK, operating all over the country, and the 99% reliability stat I will get into in a bit later. But we do pride ourselves on having a high reliability on those roughly 2,000 trains a week that we deliver, and our clients include everybody that uses rail freight. So a few on the screen there, and obviously always looking to try and bring more people from other logistics solutions onto rail. So hopefully those of you that maybe are looking at what your logistics options are will consider rail freight, and if anyone wants to get in touch after this, of course, please do, and we'll see what we can deliver. That's the overview of GB, and now I'll sort of move into the slides proper.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. And yes, the first thing you're going to introduce us to is technology. So this sector of rail freight may seem old-fashioned sometimes, and sometimes the people that we talk to do not even know all the possibilities that exists, technologically speaking. It's actually not. It's actually pretty modern, and there is loads of things to do, and it's even tailored to the different industries that you work with. So yeah, please do present us some more details on this.
Yeah, will do. I mean, and I think the link to some of this appearing old-fashioned is linked to some of the way the railway works in the UK. So, and though I can see some on the call who will now correct me on this because I know they have a much better knowledge. But TOPS trusts the system that Network Rail uses to effectively plan and record train operations in the UK. I believe is a 1960s US dot system that was bought by British Rail back in the day, and effectively that is the core of almost all of the information that we have that runs on the UK network. But what has happened probably definitely in the last 10 years, probably sped up in the last 5 years, is a sort of using that core technology and systems to then plumb it in and build upon it with new portals, new technological systems, and different ways of doing things. So what I wanted to do was pick out a couple of things that we have, and in a sort of BBC manner, other operators and providers will also be able to provide the same. So in terms of customer portals, from our perspective, it's very much about providing a web-based solution that allows customers to see where their train is. In time, we'd like to move that to where your product is, because ultimately, whilst we get very excited about trains, most customers are more interested in the thing on the back or on top, as opposed to the train itself. And it's about, say, sort of linking in with the wider logistics solution, because almost all rail freight users now, there are still some exceptions, but almost all are not taking their product from one place to another and then thou shall never go anywhere else again. It's almost always part of a wider logistics solution involving other forms of transport. So having that information flow is critically important, and in a second I will try and run through some industry specifics that I think are important. And then in addition to the sort of the technology that's seen by the customer, there's internal technology, and from our perspective we have systems which our train managers, our drivers use, which can assist them in both from a diagramming and delivery perspective. So they all have, it sounds quite old-fashioned to say it now because we're all so used to it, but at the time it was fairly revolutionary. They all have iPads they're issued with that effectively carry these systems and allow them to move away from a paper-based solutions for almost everything. There are also apps that allow us to get feedback live from train managers, obviously once they're stopped and in a safe place to do so, but that allows us to record delays and understand why things might be losing time. So whilst this is probably quite a level of detail that a lot of customers won't necessarily see, other than when obviously that delay builds up, it's very important for us to understand why a 3 or 4 minute delay might occur en route, because that might indicate that something's wrong in the planning, or something's wrong with fundamentally wrong with the loco or the wagons. So having that live feedback from drivers is critical. Moving on then into more looking at specific industries. Now, what I've tried to do here is effectively pick 4, and obviously you can split the industry however you want, but I've tried to pick 4 that we're going to talk through in terms of what the characteristics of that industry are, and then where some of this technology I'm talking about can assist. Now, this is intentionally high level, and clearly in the questions later on we can get into a greater level of detail. So in terms of the industries popped on the screen, I've popped automotive, aggregates, which is effectively any sort of bulk movement, steel and petrochemicals, and I've then within this picked specifics within there. So from the automotive industry, I'm looking at finished product being moved mainly from factory to export if we're talking. So from that perspective, there's a high sensitivity to tracking of the value of the cargo, because ultimately the value of the cargo can be extremely high depending on what vehicles you're moving. But even if you're moving low value cars, when you add these things up, they obviously do have a huge value to the customer. And then there's an additional challenge with most of automotive moves, is that the storage at both ends of the supply chain is limited. So you don't want to have thousands of cars sat waiting for export or import, for the simple reason that you will be paying for that space. And space, storage capacity, all of the different ways of defining space and the costs associated with space apply almost to every industry now in rail freight. We've moved a long way from the world where it's okay, there's millions of tons of X on the pile, don't worry about your train, we'll do it tomorrow. People have realized the costs associated with inventory. Most supply chain literature now has sort of worked out to the pound note where people are losing money in their supply chain. So everybody has moved away from that world, and automotive is no different. So in terms of that sensitivity to delivery and making sure that we're not causing issues within the wider supply chain, that customer portal, real-time tracking, real-time information on delays, and transparent communication is absolutely critical. Moving on to steel industry. Again, you can pick many different bits of the steel industry. I'm being fairly sort of draconian, just picking one bit. So I'm picking steel production, mid production really, because I'm talking about the movement of hot steel between processing plants. Mainly because I'm trying to sort of create a feel for what the different bits of the industry are and how they do cross over. So clearly, when moving hot product, there's safety implications and alike. But the bigger issue is that the costs associated with cooling is huge, because the cost associated with heating is huge. So the more heat you lose in your transport, the more you need to put back in, and effectively puts cost into the operation, as opposed to in an automotive scenario, I'm talking about the cost of the supply chain. In this steel example, it's the cost of the literal operation of said steel company. So obviously there's an importance in ensuring the tracking systems are accurate, both from a safety perspective in terms of knowing where this product is, because it is, for want of a better word, dangerous to handle. But also it's critical in if we have delays or issues, it's critical that the customer is aware, so that they can then build it into their production processes and make sure that if you've lost a greater level of heat than was expected, they've built into their production process that is the case, and we're not going to delay further. Moving on to the aggregate side, this is very much space and stocking led from a perspective of what we need to do. So much of this is actually about what's on the train and what's come off the train. So obviously some sites have got bottom discharge on their wagons, so effectively the doors at the bottom of the wagon open up in a hopper house or an unloading zone, and effectively you can be confident the vast majority of the product has emptied the wagon if all is working correctly. The more common type of aggregates flow is box wagon traffic, which effectively is unloaded from the top using grabs. That then means that the quantity coming off can vary due to how much is left in the wagon at the end and how much is loaded in at loading point. And from a customer perspective, 5-10% variances in a wagon over a year can add up to huge volume. So therefore ensuring that we are sharing the exact weights off weigh bridges and ensuring that those are shared through various means, whether that's customer portals or even using tops and truss to ensure accurate train weights, is absolutely critical for their operations. In addition to the fact, and similar to automotive, the space is limited, so that sort of live tracking, that sort of ability to share where their train is key, but the priority really is understanding the amount of material moved on a given day and in a given train. And then finally, for this sort of whistle-stop tour for a few randomly picked industries that I picked on, petrochemicals, the obvious point being, if you're moving petrochemicals, there's a hazardous material side to life and a compliance to safety, making sure that the train is prepped correctly, making sure that we are running in the right place at the right time, and the customer is aware of that. Now, petrochemicals could also be linked with sort of military traffic as well, and alike in terms of moving munitions, but it's the same principle. It's the hazardous material type conversation. One of the biggest tools, I think, in terms of this, that as in addition to the things that we've discussed, because as you probably sensed, each of these have got an aspect whereby all of the technology that's out there is applied to all of the trains. It's just some of it's more useful than others. The one bit we have additionally from a GB Railfreight perspective, but I know that others are looking at it as well, is the rollout of body cameras on our rail operators, which for sort of old speak is the shunters and the train prep. And something like petrochemicals is absolutely brilliant for those sort of things, because it allows us to, in the event of any incidents or issues, very quickly determine the status of the train when it left its terminal. So for things like handbrakes, wagon condition and alike, it's easy to say, yep, train left site as it should have done, and we have the technology and the body cams to demonstrate that and quickly review it, or to positively confirm that there was an issue, and therefore we don't go off trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. We can very quickly determine the root cause. So sort of trying to sum up all of that in terms of technology for overcoming the challenges. Real-time monitoring and communications are key. Scheduling software and the timetabling work I will touch on in a second. But it's really about, and I think the key for me from a selfish rail freight perspective, is understanding that each of those industries has a different requirement, has a different need, and we have to adjust what we provide to meet those needs and then move technology with it as well. So one of the things that is happening as we speak is a look at how we can use AI in a lot of these solutions. So something like timetable planning is absolutely perfect for something whereby an AI type solution can do 90% of the problems, leaving the 10% really difficult stuff to the experts to figure out, whereas quite a lot of that at the moment is all done by manual. Same with diagramming, same with rostering, because ultimately, for as long as trains are running, they're going to have people in the front of them driving them, and those people will need to be rostered and diagrammed. And people are people, and they need to have rules and fatigue management and so forth applied. So it's not a simple case of a jigsaw, put them all in a thing and go, it works. There is a whole load of rules sat behind that provide limitations on that. I have actually touched on some of the next bits of the section, but just to really emphasize the importance, because I think we can sometimes be a bit in looking inside and looking at the industry ourselves and focus a bit too much on rail operations, and there was a signal failure and driver was sick and all of this, and too much of the what's my challenge at GB Railfreight or what's my challenge in the railway, and not enough consideration of what the industries that we serve. And ultimately, my job and my business only exists because people want to move some things around. And so if we don't truly understand what our customers and the industries that they work in require, then we will struggle. So I've touched quite a lot on space and stocks, but it's one that I can't really emphasize enough. The world where you stick it in 1 million tons of a stockpile are long gone. And the costs associated with those are absolutely huge. The next one is to a certain extent blindingly obvious, but I think it's important to emphasize, which is logistics and supply chains is ultimately a cost in every business that they would rather not have, because every business's core product, other than mine as a logistics business, is not to move things around. They're wanting to sell the thing, they're wanting to process the thing, they're wanting to do whatever. So ultimately we have to acknowledge that everything we do has to be done to make those supply chains quicker. And that's about ensuring delivery times, ensuring continuous communication, and making sure that we are delivering ultimately what are 2 seconds of a sip of water, and I think.
Sure. Thank you very much for this. And yes, we're moving on to the 99% reliability. And this is one very big figure that that GB Railfreight puts a focus on. And at first sight, I thought, well, this is a score you can only dream of, 99%, right? And my second thought was, as a shipper, isn't this the least you could expect from your railway undertaking? So there were two questions that I had in mind, and we quickly discussed this also before. But yeah, your input on this would be very interesting, Alex.
Yeah, and I think one of those things that is tricky is 99% is a high number, and ultimately it creates a level of questioning about it. I think the one thing I would say is, and we haven't really touched on, I guess what I'd call some of the negatives of rail freight, which I probably don't want to dwell on too much, but the truth is that there's a huge fixed cost associated with running a rail freight business and a rail freight operation. And you need a level of volume and a distance to economically make it work. And because of that, structure requires that behind it, and timescales involved, it actually lends itself to a high performance level. It's just the negative consequences that there's an outlay at the initial sort of barriers to entry side of it, which put people off getting into it. But in terms of that 99%, there are 3 real ways from my perspective, and I'd be interested to hear others' views at the end, but there's 3 ways of measuring performance for me, and that is around a cancellation rate. So did you get your train? Yes or no, quite binary, but ultimately how much do you cancel, frankly, and that's an easier number to work out, and I'm pleased to say that over a sort of you do it on any given day, you might be below because you get unlucky, but over a sustained time period of a year or multiple years, so that is something we can say confidently. You've got another way of doing it, which is a time to 15. It's an industry, and it is an internal industry metric that's used, and effectively it's not just did you get the product there, because as I touched on in terms of space and how we integrate with other bits of the industry, if I get every single train to every customer 10 hours late, yes, I can sit there and say I haven't cancelled anything, but they're not going to be particularly pleased because everything's 10 hours late. So there's obviously a need to have a time aspect to it, which is where the delivery to 15 comes in. And then obviously the natural thing then becomes do both. And if you can do both and control them, then you are delivering brilliantly for your customer. The one thing I would say, and I think this would be fairly standard across the industry, is that in time and full percentages that we use in terms of our sort of marketing and saying what our delivery windows are, we'll almost always have a level of carve out. So what that will mean is that if it will only be on the failures that have been caused by the haulier. So in my case, GB Railfreight. So when we're talking about was it on time and was it full, if it's a service whereby we're providing the wagons as well, it's a case of saying, was that train at full length? Did it arrive within that 15-minute window? And if it didn't, but because of a signal failure or something out of the control of GB Railfreight, that would then be seen from a stats perspective 99% of the time not as a GB Railfreight failure. So that's one thing that I think we do also have to bear in mind. And I think there were some colleagues on from Network Rail from a trying to make this not an internal industry conversation. Well, I say most, I think they're delayed it, Network Rail has delayed it, or somebody else, they just want their train. So there is a nuance to how we present data. But ultimately, even when you throw in all railway causes and performance, the reliability stats are in the 90s, and it is it's a good solution. I guess everyone would expect me to say that. And that leads on to just those points around the importance to shippers. If we get to a point where every train is delivered, it's got what they want on it, and it's within that time window, the supply chain efficiency, the latent capacity that people will build into their supply chains can be reduced down over time. And it's a bit like when you get your train commuting in the morning, you go the first day, you stand at the wrong door, and then the next day you go, well, if I move that one down, it's quicker tomorrow. That is very much how this is how we can get supply chains more efficient, is by those marginal gains. But the only way that we're going to convince customers and users of rail freight to do that is to demonstrate a level of delivery. And that then links into operational continuity for whatever their business is. It allows a level of cost efficiency, and finally it ensures that customers are happy, because ultimately that is why we are all here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say that stakes are high for shippers, and all the points you mentioned are important for getting to this balance, and ultimately shift more freight to rail, obviously, because that's the objective of all of us here. Just before you move forward in this chapter, we have a couple of polls up that you can answer to, if you like, on the bottom right side of your screen. And Alex, please proceed with balancing reliability costs and CO2, of course.
Thank you. So I sort of want to touch on the obvious point, which is, in order to deliver brilliant reliability, there's a cost impact and how do you deliver that. In order to lower the cost of operation right down, there will be an impact on reliability, and clearly, increasingly, the conversation moves into what's the CO2 output of the trains that you're running, and more generally what your logistics solution is adding to your production of your company's CO2. So I've sort of tried to break those down and just sort of talk through some best practice. Now, again, acknowledging that we have a decent number of railway attendees, this is again been done in a way that doesn't use railway knowledge and railway wording. It's done from a perspective of saying you've just turned up and you want to use a train and you don't know how to use that, but you want to move some product around. So the wording around paths and things like that aren't directly industry speak. So in terms of how we can best ensure that we can give reliable paths, i.e. reliable delivery to customers, understanding volumes, accurately forecasting that, is hugely important from a managing your business and running your business perspective, and making sure that we have the assets and the people in the right places. But it's also critical to allowing us to work with Network Rail as the custodian of the UK network to get paths in the working timetable, secure them, get access rights, which is effectively the contractual relationship between a rail operator and Network Rail, and make sure that we can deliver them, and collaboration with customers to understand what that means. So it's all well and good getting a path on the network and saying we can run your train at 11 o'clock tomorrow, but if it takes 5 hours to load it and we've only given you 3 hours of loading time, then it's not going to work. So we have to make sure we align with the customer's wider logistics solution, and then also ensure that Network Rail is on board with the alignment of those. In terms of efficiency and how we get a sort of better outcome for customers, we very rarely are booking paths as it sort of says on there. Most of the time, it is very much around agreeing a framework of what a customer would like, and then they're ordering the volume of work they would like on a week A for week B or a month A for month B basis, with a level of tolerance that's created. So obviously you can't go from next week I want 1 train a day and then the following week you want 200, but you have some tolerance levels that we agree. And then in other bits of the market, so something like an intermodal, so container trains from deep sea ports or inland ports, there's much more of a spot type arrangement in that market. So you can effectively manage up and down the volume on a shorter term timescale, but the decisions that are being made are very similar. The one bit that I really was quite keen to talk about is booking most CO2 efficient paths. Now, this is not really something we've ever talked about at any great detail in the rail freight sector, or actually I would suggest anywhere else in the railway. But it is something we're moving to legislation, and just it's the right thing to do, mean that the debates are moving around how do we make supply chains effectively better for the environment. And that then starts a debate which says, should there be a preference for electric locomotives? Do customers want that? Are customers happy for the changes that might mean? And so at a very basic level, there's an asset that's at the front of a train that might need to change, and that might have cost implications. But from a practical planning perspective, it's also is the 2 locations that the customer wants to move their product or material around from, do they have electric capability? And unfortunately, in quite a lot of cases, you don't have that end-to-end electric provision on the UK network. So that's something that we really would like to explore more, and I will touch on the sort of what we're doing on that. And then the other side of it is the programs that individual companies, both rail freight companies and our customers, do: carbon offsetting, use of renewable energies, alternative fuels, and that and that type of thing. But what I really wanted to do now was, and one thing will be in the questions, just to say what's people's views on how much the transition has happened in terms of moving towards CO2 efficient palming, as I've called it on here, but effectively just decarbing your supply chain, and how much do people feel that we've moved into a world where greater cost implications, which unfortunately in most cases, not all, but in most cases are associated with decarbonising your supply chain. Are we ready to have that debate that says, yes, we are going to increase the cost of our supply chains, acknowledging everything that has been said in the preceding half an hour of my talk around the focus is on efficiency and taking costs out of those supply chains. But moving on to what we are doing, in terms of trying to manage all of this, so get yourself a supply chain that delivers for an industry, that delivers for an output that they require, that ensures that we're doing it safely, that we're doing it in a way that's sustainable both financially and environmentally, presents a huge challenge for all supply chain and logistics businesses. But what a business that is focused on having giant diesel locomotives at the front, even if stats show that they produce 70% less emissions than road for bulk movements, is still a huge challenge, because ultimately we've got the big thing at the front with a diesel engine. So one of the things that we are focusing on is investment in a new fleet of locomotives that are, actually, let's pop a photo up so it'll be nicer to look at the photo. And for those, that is not England. That sky is too nice to be England. That's in Valencia where these are being built. But in terms of the what we're aiming to do here, is this from a GB Railfreight perspective, and actually from a wider rail freight perspective, we think is one of the solutions to the future of heavy freight movements. Ultimately, this has been designed to support our internal decarbonisation and environmental plans, but it's also a platform that allows us to make the industry change should others in the industry be interested in the solution. It's manufactured by Stadler. I am sure that anyone who was interested in moving into these and purchasing some, they'd be very happy to have a conversation. And it is about moving away from a pure diesel solution at the front of freight trains. One of the challenges, and I touched on it earlier, is that end-to-end for the majority of rail freight users and customers is not fully electrified. So one of the things that we have had to focus on is having a bi-mode solution, which the Class 99 is, and it effectively has a small modern diesel engine along with the pantograph, which you can just make out above, just behind the cab on the ceiling of the loco. This loco is obviously in production, will be in testing and should be rolled out at the end of 25, early 26, and we'll then receive our new fleet over in the year 26. We believe it's the successor to the 66. Those of you who are on the call from a railway perspective will know that the proof's in the pudding and it needs to be tested and demonstrated that, but it's been designed to haul the same capability of a 66 and under electric power greater. It's also been built with the view, and I will touch on other options that are out there in a second, but it has been built with the view that it's a platform. So should battery technology or another solution that replaces diesel get there, you effectively should be able to lift the diesel engine out and pop whatever the new technology is, because it's effectively just a powertrain. Additionally, we are we're effectively modeling it on a Class 66, so it will go everywhere that a Class 66 can go, and there will be under electric power some speed gains, albeit those of you on the call involved in any timetabling will know it's not necessarily a simple solution to say more speed means your path's going to be quicker, but the intent is that it adds efficiency into that bit of the supply chain as well. One more picture for everyone's benefit from another angle. And fortunately, this one is a better one to show that the blue is the correct color, because one of the concerns I had when I first saw them was that from certain angles, it doesn't look like the right blue. And those of you that are railway people on this call will understand where I'm coming from. Those of you that don't will think I'm absolutely crazy, which I'm totally aware of. From a sort of outcome perspective, the environmental impact, as I've touched on, diesel is better than road for bulk movements. I think that's universally accepted. Roughly that 70% number of carbon emissions is per tonne is what's quoted. The maths on these would do another 50% reduction on that number. So it's all about getting to a point of completely decarbed. Ultimately, you can't get to a decarbed world in your supply chain without factors that are not in our control. So even when a Class 99 runs on the UK network entirely under electric power, it is still not a carbon zero solution, because the UK's power generation is not a carbon zero solution. So it's one of those things that when you get into some of this stuff around the carbon delivery, you start realizing how big the challenge and the problem is. And just as a sort of share my views on the world, other options that can be considered are the use of internal combustion engines. Ultimately, if every single diesel powered locomotive in this country was to run with a modern compliant Euro spec diesel engine, you would cut emissions in this supply chain markedly. And the best way I can sort of provide a layman's terms explanation of that is, if you've got a 30-year-old car and you buy a brand new car, the emissions of the car will be much reduced, even though the car output is still taking unleaded or diesel. And so there is still a benefit in bringing new diesel only rolling stock into the UK. The reason we didn't go down that route is that the once you buy a new loco, that's your cost. Your cost is in the creation of a new asset. The marginal cost from that new asset to a more environmentally friendly asset is considerably less when you consider you're buying a new asset in the first place. If you do the comparison between an old asset and a more carbon friendly asset, then yes, the delta is huge. Hydrogen is often mentioned. Again, it's one of those ones where the technology, from what we can see, is not there yet for rail freight. If it does come along, then the platform approach to the powertrain should assist. We've touched on the battery. Ultimately, I think battery does, even in the short term, have some solutions for some of our passenger colleagues, in that the power and torque you need to move passenger trains around on a regular timetable probably lends itself to a certain level of battery. In terms of the torque and the pull away power you need for a 2,000-ton freight train, the battery technology and the volume of battery you would need in order to do that is too great to make it viable right now. However, that isn't to say that it won't get there. So that's really why we've ended up on a bi-mode solution. And we've tried, and the proof will be in the pudding, but the intent is that this will be able to pull 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 tons on the right routes behind it, and be a mainline heavy haul freight locomotive for the future. And clearly, all of this will bring significant CO2 reductions in the supply chain, and obviously that benefits the entire supply chain, not just GB Railfreight in terms of its carbon output. And hopefully it will provide a more sustainable solution. Any engineers on the call will be sort of shouting bathtub effect, and this thing won't work when it starts, and you will have lots of challenges when it's first delivered, and I am sure there will be. But over time, this will be a more reliable solution. So I realise that this has been a little bit of a talk all over the shop in terms of rail freight, customers, technological change and dramatic things in terms of new locomotives and bringing new technology into that side of things. But I just wanted to close with integrating technology into any supply chain, rail freight operations will reduce costs over time, even though clearly on that most recent decarbonisation, there's a short-term cost implication. It will enhance reliability. And the key thing is that we keep providing tailored solutions to industries that specifically understand what they need, and remember that we are a logistics solution, not a train operation. We're only here to move the things that people need moving, and if they don't need the things moving, then you don't need us. And I thank you for your time. I hope you found it interesting, and look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Alex. Very complete, and I learned so many more things than during the preparation. So thank you for that. I also wanted to ask a question about the fuel. What about HVO? I mean, with all these fish and chips.
Yeah. So in terms of looking at HVO, we have, and we're working with suppliers in the background. I know that some of our competitors are running some trials and trains right now. It's definitely a short-term solution. And by short-term, I mean sort of sub 5 years. I don't mean like 3 months. And I definitely think it's a way forward. The challenge, I think, is that you've still got an environmental impact from HVO, whether that's in the production of it or the burning of it. And then you've got a scalability and a volume problem. Ultimately, running HVO on discrete routes, I think, is viable, and I think it works. And for high intensity carbon industries, it's probably a very good short term. And again, I use short term in the railway sense of short term, not in the normal sense of short term. But I do worry that we need to, as an industry and as a supply chain industry, acknowledge that if we're properly going to do decarb, it's going to be fundamental changes to the way we operate that make that happen. And I think HVO for me is that stopgap. However, I know that others will have different views.
Right, thanks a lot. We have 2 questions here. Pelagie wanting to know how the technologies you showed are helping you winning and retaining rail freight experts, especially young talents.
It's a really good question. I've never really thought about it from in terms of recruitment. I think in terms of if you take it specifically to rostering or timetable planning, because I think those are the 2 areas where we can see that technology that's in use today and effectively computer programming and coding that can take away basic tasks, make those jobs more appealing and attractive. And for those that are doing the roles, I think they definitely see the benefits. I'm not convinced yet that that's necessarily an external recruiting tool that's assisting. But as we see with generational change in terms of effectively people who are young people now today going into the workforce, I think trying to get them to plan trains and diagrams using what effectively is systems that are no more advanced than in the 60s and 70s. They just happen to be on an Excel spreadsheet or a program that's been made to make an Excel spreadsheet look nicer. I think that will become something that puts people off. So selling this as a benefit, I think, is one that is a really good idea, actually, and thank you for that, because I hadn't thought about that from that perspective before. So I'll definitely be taking that one away and saying to the planning teams, look, guys, when we're recruiting people in fresh, because ultimately a lot of our planners, that's the route into our company. It tends to be the sort of the nearer the entry level roles. So actually telling people there are technological solutions that can work with how you do your day-to-day lives, I think would be really good.
Thank you for that. And second and probably last question, unless there is any question here in your head and you want to get it out there, is now. Charlie wants to know, what would you see as the biggest challenge facing shippers using UK rail, and how would you address this?
So the first one I'd probably say is complete unknown, in that the makeup of the UK railway network and who oversees it is currently up in the air with the government recent change. So all expectations are that GB Railways, a new body will be created that will effectively take on all of the publicly funded aspects of the UK railway industry, and also act as a sort of strategic planner as well. I don't know if that's the biggest challenge for rail freight. I know that it's the biggest unknown. I think the next thing, in terms of a more practical problem, is capacity on the network in terms of having the space to run the trains, and the ongoing and perennial competing with the existing traffic. Now, the majority of that is passenger traffic, but there's plenty of competition between existing freight traffic as well. I think that's the more practical biggest problem. The bit that worries me the most is just the unknown about what the industry looks like, because ultimately any government change from a business perspective is always worrying, because businesses, we would rather have what we know and we can work with what we know. So sometimes we'd rather have what we know than risk a change that might be beneficial, but we're scared of the change almost. So I think the unknown factor is probably the bit that worries me and keeps me up the most. In terms of the most practical problem for how we run and do our business, it's really about having the capacity to actually run what our customers need when they need it. And that's the key bit, when they need to unload, when they need to load, and that becomes a challenge.
All right, thank you for that. And one last question from Mark. Says, thank you, Alex, for the insightful presentation. Do you believe as a rail industry, we make it simple for cargo owners to book rail space without large volume?
Yes, I do. I think, again, it's industry specific. So if you are wanting to move aggregate from a quarry, I suspect there's always going to be a volume challenge. That might not be insurmountable, but there's always going to be a need to hit a certain volume just because of the economics against road and the distances involved. I think where we've got markets that are a industry solution, for want of a better word, so your intermodal container markets are your obvious ones, but there are others, and you can then the shipper, for the purpose of the conversation, so the rail freight business can take the risk. I think those are the perfect suited ones to say, you don't need a whole train, you can do a little bit. What I'd like to see us do more of, because I think that market's relatively developed, albeit there's still a nervousness around starting new traffic, but I think that market's relatively developed. I'd like to see us getting better at putting customers in touch with each other who might be able to share trains. So metropolitan centres will always need a certain amount of materials, whether that's aggregate, steel, containers, whatever it might be. And I think we're uniquely placed to go to businesses, to understand them and say, oh, so you're looking for a site in East London. We actually work with this other party, and can we do half a train of your stuff, half a train of their stuff? And I think we're not very good at that, and I think we need to get better at it. And that's where I'd probably want the focus to be going forward.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. I think we're done with the questions. Just a short piece of information. So if you want to meet the people live that have been talking, at least some of them. There is the Railtech Summit taking place in Paris on 14 November. You can see the link at the bottom left, and it's also going to be in the recap email that you're going to receive soon. And with this, I would say thank you, Alex, for this. And yeah, hope to see you soon. And feel free to pop in the next Railtech Masterclass. There is one taking place next month in 2 weeks' time, actually, and one in October, and then November, and so on and so on. So there's loads of things going on. Yeah, and thank you very much, Alex. Any word to conclude?
No, just thank you very much, everyone. I hope you found it interesting, and if my details are on the screen, so if anyone wants to get in touch and ask any questions or have a further debate on this topic, do get in touch. And also, if we want it to be a sort of non-specific GB Railfreight conversation, there's also the Railfreight group, which you can get in touch with me as a board member, or Maggie as the Director General, and I'm sure that we'd be happy to have any questions and conversations that might help get more rail on freight, but freight on rail. But thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
Sure. Thanks a lot. See you soon, everyone, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.